Welcome back to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Noxon, your host. Joining me on the phone right now is State Senator Rob Sampson. Senator Sampson, how are you this morning, sir?
I am well, Steve, and thank you for the quality bumper music.
Every time I get you on, as soon as I put you on the air, I think to myself, oh, I should have played Red Hot. But this time I actually remembered. The other day, a number of Republicans and others stood on the steps of the Capitol and called for further relief for the citizens of the state of Connecticut, more specifically tax relief here in the state of Connecticut, to help at least a little bit offset the impact of inflation that we're all feeling. Tell us a little bit about some of the proposals that were presented.
Sure. Yes, we did. I was delighted to stand there with my Republican colleagues to call for what I think is the only responsible thing to do at this point, which is to return the overtaxation and the extra money that is in surplus in the Connecticut state government back to the taxpayers because it's their money. The Democrats, they want to make a big issue out of guns. They want to talk about abortion. They want to talk about everything except what I think really matters to Connecticut residents right now today, which is a combination of things, but most importantly, inflation, the rising cost of goods and services, certainly the cost of gasoline. Crime is another issue also that they're avoiding. But the one thing that we can do something about right now is we can return money back to the people who it belongs to help offset some of the pain that is associated with this inflation. And we can try and affect the cost of goods and services going forward by reducing the taxes that actually drive up those costs. And that's the plan that we released the other day. It's called Affordable Connecticut.
One of the things I was frustrated about during the last legislative session is that, everybody was so happy with all this money flying around, all this, oh my goodness, look at all this additional cash we have. And, you could argue whether or not there was actually any policies put in place that made that happen. But there was just no shortage of effort to try to figure out some way to spend this money, some way to use this money to buy, favor and votes. And, the Republicans basically said, listen, we do a sales tax cut, everybody benefits. Everybody pays that. Everybody's going to get a little bit of a break on that. The Democrats wanted to very, very specifically target who was going to get any relief with their supposed $600 million tax cut. And they were doing it so that like half of it didn't take effect for a year. There was always going to be an opportunity to take it back. And it was really just kind of frustrating to me because every citizen in the state of Connecticut is suffering with inflation and this incredible tax burden. Why wouldn't you want to give every single citizen in the state of Connecticut relief?
Yeah, I totally agree, Steve. I mean, it's been very frustrating, especially to be watching Governor Lamonts, campaign commercials where he's walking around acting as if he's the great benefactor of the citizens of Connecticut, and that, through his, kindness and benevolence, he's offered them a pittance as far as a tax relief as a part of the most recent state budget. But the state budget that just passed increases spending $2 billion. And I always tell people, if you really want to know whether you're paying more taxes or not, don't listen to what they tell you about tax relief. Look at how much they're actually spending. Because where does that money come from? It's all in the form of taxes. So effectively, if the state's spending $2 billion more, that means there's $2 billion in new taxes that are going to be paid by Connecticut residents. And, so in this case, they're giving you $500 million, they claim, and that's a debatable number too, in tax relief. But they just took $2 billion, so that's equivalent to taking $20 out of your pocket and then giving you back $5 and pretending that you're treating someone well. And it's absurd. And this is on top of the governor's previous budget, which was a $2 billion plus budget increase. The numbers that we are talking about, Steve, and I know for listeners, it's probably hard to follow if you're not really closely paying attention to the state legislature and what each budget turns out to be and so forth. But just to give you an example, when I first got elected in 2010, the state budget was around $16 billion. And that included all of the pass-through Medicaid money, which was another $4 or $5 billion at the time, that came from the federal government. Today, our state budget is in the 25 or 26 billion number, not including that number, which is probably in the 8 to 10 billion. So that's an unbelievable increase in a decade. And as you mentioned, I was listening earlier, you were talking about inflation. Democrats have caused this. The crazy amount of printing of money and handing out of imaginary dollars is going to cause inflation. So they've created this problem, and yet they are not addressing the solution. And there is really no solution to that inflation. I don't know how you fix it other than trying to make sure that if you have extra tax receipts as a result, because that's what's happening is the state of Connecticut has a budget surplus for two reasons. One, because the federal government is printing money and especially helping blue states. So you got President Biden helping out Ned Lamont by making sure Connecticut gets its share of grant money. So we have extra money in our coffers from that. But beyond that is the inflation itself. Making goods and services cost more means the amount of taxes that are collected go up, and therefore the state has all this extra money. It should go back to Connecticut residents today.
If you take into account the $3 billion plus that we have in the rainy day fund and add that to the $4 billion plus that we were told was the surplus last year, at the end of the year, you're talking $7 billion. That's almost a third of the entire state budget that we have overtaxed the citizens of the state of Connecticut. Now, money's fungible. You could talk about where it came from and how it got there and what caused it and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's $7 billion in additional revenue that the state took in that it doesn't spend. It doesn't need. It's surplus money. And that is just, first of all, it's reprehensible. But also, the Tax Foundation's annual state and local tax burdens report just came out and found out that Connecticut residents last year paid an equivalent of 15.5% of the state's net product in state and local taxes. The national average is only 11. We are the second highest taxed state in the country. We have $7 billion. We taxed and took in $7 billion more than we needed. I can't see any argument for not returning that to the people.
Right, and despite all that taxation, we are still the most indebted state in the nation per capita. Every person, I don't know what the number is now. Every time I look at it, it goes up. It was around $50,000 or $60,000 per person is in debt because of the actions of the state of Connecticut. It's ridiculous. I will tell you that, fair is fair, and I will say that one of the governor's actions has been to take a great part of the surplus and apply it to pay down pension debt, and we intend on doing that also. Even the Republican package that I'm referring to, the Affordable Connecticut package, it's around $750 million, and that is the maximum amount that we can give in this tax relief program without interfering with the rainy day fund or those pension payments or going back to revise the budget. And the reason why we've done it this way is because every one of us wants even more tax relief than this, and we want to modify the state budget. But that is a non-starter. We're not going to get the Democrats to open up that budget. But we can possibly, with the help of public input and, creating some pressure over the airwaves, things like that, maybe we can get the Democrats to bring us in for a special session to take care of the actual surplus money that is just sitting there, because really it looks bad on them. And it's going to continue to look bad on them as people watch gas prices continue to rise. One of the big things that's concerning me, Steve, is that the price of fuel oil might not seem like a big deal in June, but I'm hearing from senior citizens in my district right now who are on a payment plan, or usually they buy their oil in the summer when the prices are low. And I can sense the fear that's out there. I have it myself. I don't know how I'm going to pay my heating bill this winter. Mm-hmm. And if it looks any worse than it does now, I don't know how people are going to do it.
One of the other things that has bugged me is this whole concept that, Ned Lamont is a tax-cutting governor. Look at with all the tax cuts. And as you mentioned earlier, he's running around taking credit for tax cuts of $600 million, of which, who knows if we'll ever see any or all of it. But at the same time, he's put an additional $400 million burden on businesses in the state of Connecticut by not repaying the money we borrowed from the federal government for the unemployment trust fund. And I don't know, it's the same argument I think that you were making earlier. You don't increase taxes $400 million, give supposedly $600 million in tax relief, and say you're tax cutting. You're not. You're only giving half of the equation.
Yeah, no. If I had thought about it, I would have actually grabbed my notes about the tax cuts, quote unquote, that the governor and the Democrats are offering as part of their state budget product. Because I don't remember everything off the top of my head, but I know a substantial part of that is in the EITC, which is something you and I have talked about before, which is the Earned Income Tax Credit, which effectively is giving money to people in tax refunds who didn't even pay taxes to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So that is not a tax cut. A tax cut is, people who are paying taxes get to pay less. That's a tax cut. People who don't pay any taxes, who get a check from the government, that is an entitlement program or welfare or wealth redistribution or worse. It is not a tax cut. And it drives me crazy the way that they like to twist these things.
Well, and again, a lot of the tax cutting that they're talking about is this property tax relief because they capped the property tax on vehicles. And look, we can have an argument about why certain different towns charge different rates for their mill rates and their property tax. But I look at that and I think that is the biggest swindle that I've ever seen. They force cities and towns to cap their property tax mill rate on cars, with a promise down the road that they'll be made whole by the state government. Well, we've seen this game before. We've seen it with pilot taxes, or payments in lieu of taxes. We've seen it with all kinds of things that the state has promised to the cities and towns that when the moment comes due to cut that check, suddenly they're crying poor and saying, well, we really wanted to do it this year, but we just don't have the resources. And I truly believe that's going to happen with this too.
Oh, absolutely. What's going to happen, obviously, is these towns are not going to be in a position to be able to eat that loss of tax revenue from their, residents. So they're just going to jack up the property taxes on homes and commercial property. That's the only choice that they will have. I'm concerned about lots of budgeting across Connecticut, not just the state budget, but a lot of municipal budgets. The danger of having all of this free money, for lack of a better term, printed by the federal government and handed out by them to the state, and then the state handing it over to towns, is that you have budgets that are done very irresponsibly, where these towns and the state are creating programs and spending that go out into the future, and they are doing it with this one-time revenue. And when that happens, what happens when the money runs out? What happens when it's not there next time? They're going to be looking for more revenue in different places and more taxes, obviously, from their constituents. And, the more you limit the ability for the towns to collect revenue in certain places, all it's going to do is mean they make it up somewhere else. I mean, if you squeeze a balloon, it gets fatter somewhere else. And that's what's going to happen here. You lower the car tax, which is a debatable thing, too, because I don't know necessarily that car taxes are going to be lowered. Simply capping a mill rate doesn't really cap car taxes. You've got to cap the mill rate and the amount they can assess the car for, and that's changing simultaneously. And it remains to be seen, to me, exactly how it's going to work out.
Well, I've been reading that when they're doing the car assessments now, they're doing them on local, on current market value, and as we've seen over the last number of years, the cost or the value of used cars has skyrocketed and is going up again. So they're capping supposedly the mill rate on cars, but they're valuing them far higher than they were in the past. So it's a wash. You're not saving any money.
Yeah, no, I fully suspect that the new valuations are going to offset a large part of any type of credit that might be seen as a result of a cap in the mill rate. And towns that actually have low mill rates, theirs is going to go up. They're going to receive a windfall based on the new evaluations. I don't even know what to tell you, Steve. I mean, even the most responsible Republican town governments, when they get free money, it's really hard to convince them not to spend it too.
Well, of course. I mean, but the biggest, and I've pointed this out in the past, but the biggest problem I have with it is one of the things that keeps the mill rates as low as they can be is the concern by local politicians that of course, they want to get reelected, but because they don't want to hear and anger their population, their citizens. So they have a responsibility to keep that mill rate as low as they can. But now you've got it to such a point. And here's my other argument about this cap. Okay, right now this state caps it at whatever it is. And they say they're going to make up the difference if you were previously charging more than that. Well, they adjust mill rates in cities and towns all the time. What's to happen next year, the year after, when the town would have gone back and adjusted their mill rate, but now they can't because they can't exceed the cap? How do they go to the state and say, well, we would have made the mill rate this, but you stopped us from doing that, so now you owe us X amount of money? That argument is going to be impossible. The second problem is you've got a lot of cities and towns in Connecticut that are beneath the cap right now. Well, if they're going to be told, here's your cap, and we'll give you any money extra if you need it or it would have exceeded that cap, well, there's no argument to reduce the mill rate now. The argument is simply make it as high as you possibly think you can make it because it's going to cap at some point, and the state's going to pick up the rest. It's insane.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and it's going to create just more shifting. Maybe from home taxes to car taxes in some places. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? But the moral is the meddling by state government or meddling by the federal government is problematic, because what it's doing is it's taking the system that we have in America that works so well of representative government, where people actually are close to their elected officials, close enough to make a difference, where they can see them with their own eyes at a local town meeting and tell them, look, this is what I expect you to do. And we're getting farther and farther away from that. You have more and more central planning. You've got more and more bureaucracy making changes without the direct involvement of lawmakers. And as a result, you have less accountability. I always use the PURA example, which is, it used to be the state of Connecticut lawmakers, the General Assembly, we voted on utility rate increases, and we don't do it anymore. They created a bureaucracy called PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. It was DPUC before that, but there was a lot of responsibility put there that had, potentially good motivation. But one of the terrible things at the same time was we gave them the responsibility of setting the electricity rates and approving them. And that just gave free rein to the state government to make any kind of policy changes they want without having to, deal with the ramifications of the rate increases. Oh, no, we didn't do that. All we did was make the terrible policy that led to that.
Well, it's the same thing with this effort to move zoning decisions to the state level. Once again, further removing them from the very people who are going to be affected by them, number one. And I've seen a lot of reports going, well, who's the big push behind this? Why are they doing this? And I would argue that it's probably the developers that are pushing this, and certainly many politicians who feel that they, the more power they have, the more they can benefit from it. But it's much easier for a developer to go to a state level group of unelected officials and to try to lobby them and propose their ideas to them than it is to go to individual cities and towns that are going to feel the impact acutely to whatever decisions they make. The people up in Hartford who are on this board, who may not even live in communities like East Norwalk, for example, would be making decisions about what would happen in East Norwalk, and it's not going to affect them at all. And so now the developers don't have to go to every single 169 city and town in the state of Connecticut. They just go to this one board.
That's right. These are the dangers of, growing government, central planning, progressivism, which is the act effectively of undoing representative government in favor of bureaucratic decision-making, a panel of, experts supposedly behind the scenes telling us how to live. That's supposed to be the utopia for the Democrat business model. But we can see it doesn't work, and it's certainly not fair, which is the word they like to use, because the small, well-run communities that have responsible town governments that are truly accountable to their constituents are the ones who are going to pay the price. They're the ones that are going to be punished for all of their common sense and good work because they'll be paying more. And all of that zoning stuff is really all about taking dollars and value out of small, well-run towns and giving it to the cities because they can't, support themselves on their own.
Yeah, it really is. It's just just over in every possible way. It's just a bad idea, and I can't believe anybody would promote that. So this Affordable Connecticut plan that was announced, there's a way that people can kind of show their support for this, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we have a website. It is affordableconnecticut.com. And you can go there, and I would encourage people to go check it out. It's not a complicated thing. It's just, 5 or 6 bullet points about where the tax relief is. And I'll just zip through it really quick. It's a reduction of income tax from effectively the 5% rate that most people pay down to 4%. Again, I would love to get rid of it entirely. I'd love to reduce it in the meantime more than this. But this is almost $400 million in tax relief right there. We're going to expand the gas tax holiday to diesel. And the point behind that is because everything that comes to us comes on a truck. And, if the diesel prices continue to rise, that means that everything that we purchase, bread, milk, and every other thing that comes on a truck is going to cost more. So we're going to try and have some relief there. We're going to eliminate the highway use tax, which is a terrible, terrible tax that passed at the end of 2019. It passed on a party line vote. Republicans rallied against it in a huge, huge way. This was the Democrats' answer to their failure to get tolls. They came and they passed this highway use tax, also known as the truck tax. Similar situation. Every dollar that we add onto truckers means more in the cost of goods and services. And then finally, a modest reduction in the sales tax from 6.35 to 5.99. Again, none of these things are huge or earth-shattering, but it is an effort with the budget surplus, which is the taxpayer money, to give it back to them to offset, at least a modest amount of the inflation and rising fuel prices and things like that. I encourage people to go to affordableconnecticut.com and to sign the petition. We don't have the votes as Republicans to make this happen, but we have been effective in recent years in making policy change in Hartford because we got the people of Connecticut behind us. That's how we stopped tolls to begin with. And I think we can make this happen also if we get enough people involved. There's going to be rallies across the state. I'm in the planning stages right now. I'm going to do one in Southington for sure and maybe some other towns to make, and create awareness of this thing. And I feel good about it. I feel that it's, number one, the right thing to do, and I think it is going to put the Democrats on their heels. And it's also going to make it very clear to everyone in the state of Connecticut who is actually looking out for Connecticut residents.
Well, and I think on the website it's really good because you put your name, you put your email address, and then there's an area in there that where you can type out and basically lay out for you and the other legislators exactly how you're being impacted by this. You mentioned people on a fixed income aren't going to be able to heat their homes. They can't put food on the table. They're choosing between driving to the grocery store or putting fuel oil in their tanks. It's horrible, horrible, horrible policy. All the way around to keep these taxes at the level that they're at when you're talking, again, $7 billion in surplus cash. That's additional taxes that should not have been imposed upon the citizens of the state of Connecticut. What was it? I think it was Calvin Coolidge that said that any tax taken in that is more than what is needed to run the government is basically theft. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it is. I mean, you're talking a third more than what they needed to run the state. It's absurd.
And they're getting away with it, which is the travesty of the whole thing. This November is so important, Steve. If Republicans are ever going to, get a handle on what's going on in the state of Connecticut, we have got to win some elections this November. And, I'm working with a whole bunch of candidates across the state, trying to teach them what I know, trying to help them earn money so that they can run effective campaigns. And really, it has to be on the policy. It has to be pointing out very clearly for the people of Connecticut what has happened under Democratic control over the last 40 years. And if you just want to talk about the last 2 years too, fine. There are plenty of examples of bad policy decisions that are hurting our state, making our state unattractive for people to live here, to go to school here, to start a business, to keep their business here. And we're still engaging in every bad practice there is. You got corporate welfare. We did another corporate welfare deal for Sikorsky this year. And I love Sikorsky. I want him to stay here. I want him to keep making helicopters and creating jobs in our state. But when you give them an incentive to stay here in the form of tax credits, you're effectively charging everyone else more tax.
Yeah.
That's a bad policy.
It truly is.
We shouldn't be engaging. And it's a Band-Aid besides. It's an example. It's proof that we are doing a lousy job as a state if we have to bribe people to stay here. We need to make policy that makes people appreciate Connecticut and all of its benefits and want to stay here. And that's what I'm focused on.
All right, Senator, give the website one more time.
It is affordableconnecticut.com, and Connecticut is all spelled out.
All right, Senator Rob Sampson, State Senator Rob Sampson, thanks again very much for your time, sir. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to having you back soon.
It is always my pleasure, Steve. Thanks for everything you do.
Certainly. Thank you, sir. Certainly. Thank you, sir.